I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. You know, here in the Northwest, we love the environment. We're proud of the fresh air that we get to breathe every day. But it turns out it's not so great everywhere in our states and in the Northwest. We're going to start tonight with a new air pollution report out from the state of Washington. It holds some disturbing conclusions for you folks living in the greater Vancouver area. So listen up. It's our big story tonight. Washington's legislature recently passed a law requiring the state's Department of Ecology to issue a report every 2 years on air pollution. Its goal is to identify the level of pollution in communities which it describes as historically overburdened with health, social, and environmental inequities and are highly impacted by air pollution, which led it to, among other places, Vancouver. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has our story.
If you live and breathe in Vancouver, your life could be shorter than your neighbors in other parts of the state.
We estimate that people aged 65 or older are twice as likely to die from air pollution that comes from human sources. That's what we were looking at.
Susan Woodward is with the Air Quality Program at the Washington Department of Ecology. Her agency just released a first-of-its-kind report that looks at the state of air pollution in Washington. The report identified 16 communities that have socioeconomic disadvantages and high levels of air pollution. Among them, parts of North and South Seattle, Spokane, and Vancouver.
We know that Vancouver is a transportation hub. It has heavy roadway use, it has trains, it has port activity. It's probably impacted by pollution sources across the Columbia River in Portland.
Residents of Vancouver are subject to high levels of particulate matter smaller than 2.5 micrometers, also known as PM 2.5. That kind of pollution comes from some familiar sources.
Things like wood stoves, heavy traffic and industry.
Particles that small are easily inhaled and can even cross into the bloodstream, which can lead to elevated rates of asthma, heart disease, lung cancer, and other cardiovascular diseases. That means people living in Vancouver have an average life expectancy about 2.5 years shorter than the rest of the state. And it isn't much better across the river, where residents of Multnomah County breathe the dirtiest air in Oregon. And like most environmental issues, it's worse for people of color and for older folks.
We found that older people of color, especially Black and Hispanic people, have a higher risk of death from breathing poor air compared to older white adults who live in their same community.
The report notes that people of color have been subject to racist policies for decades, like redlining. And that means they often live closer to the sources of pollution, like busy roads and industrial facilities. Woodward said it was important for people to pay attention to air quality and take precautions.
You can easily make a do-it-yourself air cleaner to remove tiny harmful particles in bad air.
The state has videos on its website on how to make affordable, do-it-yourself air purifiers.
Put a 20-inch furnace filter with a MERV rating between 11 and 14 on the back of the fan.
Beyond that, the state will also be doling out more than $10 million in grant money for community organizations working to clean up the air. And eventually, the state itself will be looking to clamp down on polluters. After many years of ignoring how air quality affects the state's most vulnerable residents, Woodward said the work is well past due.
We know that they have faced these injustices for sometimes decades, generations, and that this is why the environmental and air quality provision in the Climate Commitment Act is so important for us to start righting some of those past wrongs.
Cale joins me now, and Cale, as you know, I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to reports like this. That 2.5 years is a stunning number. How'd they come up with that?
Well, it's 2.4. So first, let's be accurate there. But it is, it's an estimate and it's an average. So it's not like every single person who lives in one of these communities is going to live exactly 2.4 years less than people who live outside of it. But I think the main thrust of the report that, air pollution causes poor health outcomes, poor health outcomes can cause premature deaths, which can lead to a shorter lifespan. I think that remains true.
And they left wildfire smoke out of that, which I saw in the report is the #1 cause of this PM 2.5 air pollutant. Why'd they do that?
Yeah, so when I talked to Susan Woodward from the Department of Ecology, she told me that, wildfire smoke is a big amorphous thing that is hard to track. It's hard to find the exact source. It moves over state lines, it moves internationally from Canada, from Montana. those types of things. It will be included next year, and so I think we'll have a much clearer picture on exactly what is coming from wood stoves in people's homes, what's coming from wildfires.
Yeah, because I could hear people saying by excluding that, you're magnifying the things that you did focus on.
You know, and I think that could be possible, and I think when we get this report next year, we're going to find out a lot more about exactly which pollutants are causing which problems.
Okay, always interesting. Thank you, Cale. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Earlier this week, we told you about the state, county, city of Portland, and a local nonprofit who are all coming together to help create 70 new drug treatment beds in the city in this building along East Burnside. If all goes according to plan, it could open in the fall. It's a seemingly rare example of something in Multnomah County in the drug arena actually getting done and relatively fast. It turns out that's not the only effort in Portland to address our drug crisis. Today we learned that the Portland Fire Bureau will have a dedicated team to respond to overdoses. The hope, officials say, is that the change will better serve those struggling with addiction while taking the strain off of firefighters. Blair Best reports.
There's a sad but common tale that leads to addiction for many young people in Portland.
It's been since I aged out of the foster care system, so about almost 3 years.
Since Trinity turned to fentanyl.
I've seen quite a few people that overdose.
Herself included.
Honestly, it was very peaceful. I thought I was just really high and happy. And then I woke up freezing cold and sick.
She never went to the hospital.
The Narcan made it not necessary. I just built up a tolerance.
Frequent overdoses by people like Trinity are putting a strain on Portland firefighters, like Joseph Keenst.
It's a tragedy, frankly, to see citizens of Portland and the community deteriorate around us. Repeatedly responding to overdoses is not necessarily, I think, the best use of our resources.
Last year, Portland Fire responded to nearly 7,000 overdose calls. 1/3 happened in the downtown core. They're now testing out a new approach at how they respond.
This is a new program. It's called the Overdose Response Team.
Starting later this month, a Portland Fire paramedic and EMT, along with other healthcare professionals, will be the ones responding to overdoses downtown instead of firefighters.
Our crews are going to go. They're going to meet this individual. They're going to find out if they need more medical care. And if they don't need more medical care, they're going to leave them with additional Narcan. They're going to connect them with services.
It's a 6-month pilot program, and it will run from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Thursday.
It's a first step. I mean, we've seen this before in my time, like where there's an idea, and in order to test that idea, we need to, do a small scale trial.
I think that's a great idea as long as they're trained correctly.
Now, the announcement of this pilot program comes on the heels of the Multnomah County Chair and Board of Commissioners asking state legislators this week for more money for drug treatment programs and urging them to approve a statewide ban on the public use of illegal drugs.
We're not alone in Portland. We're not alone on the West Coast. It's across the country. It's this fentanyl crisis, and it takes a lot of people to come together to create solutions to get our society on a pathway out of where we are.
Most people don't want to live like this. They just need help.
Now, if this program works, they hope to be able to expand it to make it 24/7. Now, there are also talks coming from local government of declaring a fentanyl emergency, which would make it easier and faster for Portland to get the money and resources it needs to respond to this deadly crisis and ultimately save lives. Blair Best, KGW News.
Now, before we move on, let's pause for just a moment on one of the stats that Portland Fire gave Blair that you just heard. Portland Fire and Rescue responded to nearly 7,000 overdose calls last year. That means on average they responded to 19 overdoses every single day across our city. And we saw when Blair went on a ride-along with crews from downtown station number 1, many people are Narcaned, saved, literally brought back to life by the drug, and they declined to go to the hospital. Many worry about withdrawal symptoms. Firefighters tell Blair that they routinely see repeat patients. Those are people who overdose numerous times, and for them, the cycle of being Narcan time and again continues until eventually, Narcan's just not enough to bring them back. While you're pondering that reality, send us your thoughts on this, will you? What do you think about the Fire Bureau's new overdose response team? Or maybe you just have a comment about the drug crisis as a whole. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. Our phone number is 503-226-5090. We love hearing from you. Now let's feature some of your thoughts and answers to a question or two from our big story last night. We talked about the new I-5 bridge project, and I tagged along for a tour of the bridge with Washington State U.S. Senators Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray. They were there to highlight the $600 million the feds have already committed to the project, though the bridge team is hoping that number grows to well over $2 billion in the months and years to come. Here's a rough look at what the funding looked like for the project. The total price tag is likely between $6 and $7.5 billion, and hello, that could go even higher. Washington and Oregon lawmakers have each pledged to give $1 billion. The bridge team hopes for $2.5 billion from the feds, maybe more, and the rest, well over $1 billion, is expected to come from you and me in the form of tolling. Senator Maria Cantwell surprised me a bit yesterday when I asked her about that, saying that she would be interested to see what the project and proposals look like without any tolls. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be tolls on the new bridge. I still think that's definitely going to happen. But it's not a small thing when one of the key Northwest senators pushing for federal money says something like that. Many of you had plenty to say about the project itself and about the likelihood of those tolls.
This bridge should have been done years ago. It is a main corridor. It is extremely important. Let's get it done. If you have to put some tolls on it, do it. It needs to be done for all kinds of good reasons. Transportation, safety, etc., etc. Let's get this finally done.
All right, thanks Meldon for your comments. Ann wrote into us to say, what is it about interstate bridge do the feds not understand? It's a critical part of the federal interstate highway system, therefore the federal government needs to pay a majority of the cost. Congress people of Washington and Oregon, get busy. No tolls. I will never be in favor of them.
My father was a bridge engineer for the state of Oregon in 1957, and he was an engineer on the southbound bridge that went from Vancouver to Portland. And I remember when that bridge opened the first time, I was a little girl, I got to ride in the back seat of the car, and we were some of the first cars to go southbound on that bridge. And my dad told me that there was going to be a toll, and there was, and that after the toll paid for the bridge, then there wasn't a toll anymore. So I think we should have a toll and get it paid for.
All right, thank you for that. And hey, take a look at this. For those of you who were around during the I-5 bridge tolls back in the day, you will see this and know that it's familiar. It's a token that we used to pay the toll in order to cross the Columbia back then. Now to Alana's point about how that old toll eventually was going to go away, well, that was then, this is now. I don't think the I-5 bridge toll is going to go away once it's put in, even after the bridge is paid for. There's been no official announcement like that, but we're still very early in the process, and the tide of tolling is changing in Oregon, and they're more likely to add additional tolls instead of take any away. All right, anyway, let's get to a question we got last night from Janet.
I would like to know, is they going to take the max across the bridge? That's my question. When they tried to do it a long time ago, when TriMet asked, and Washington didn't want to do it. So I want to know that one.
Yep, great question, Janet. Thanks for that. The light rail component of the project is still very much alive. It's the basis, in fact, for a massive federal grant that the bridge team hopes to secure, likely in the neighborhood of $1 billion. But they're only eligible for that grant if the project includes some kind of mass transit, for example, light rail. So yes, even though many folks in Clark County do not want it, right now it is being planned for. The estimated cost for just the light rail, by the way, between $1.3 and $2 billion. And while we're talking about the bridge, I wanted to share a funny moment with you. It happened yesterday after the big tour, and it involves the College Football National Championship. Washington Senator Maria Cantwell, there on the right, is a huge Husky fan, and the man running the bridge replacement project, Greg Johnson, is a huge Michigan fan, which is why he has a vest with that big yellow M on it. Well, those are the two teams playing for the national championship on Monday night. During the roundtable discussion yesterday about the bridge, Cantwell just could not resist razzing Johnson.
This is truly a team effort, and it goes nowhere without the support of folks like yourself, so thank you.
Thank you. Wait a minute. Isn't that emblem upside down?
We have tried.
I think it's supposed to be the other way.
We'll see on Monday. If I flip it over, you know what happens.
By the way, as a Washington State graduate myself, I could not resist later pointing out to the senator that she's wearing Cougar colors. I thanked her for her support. She was not amused. It's fun, though, to see that these folks are indeed human, even though we rarely see that personal side of them in their big professional capacities. By the way, Greg Johnson there said that if the Huskies do win, he will wear a UW shirt after the game. Looking forward to that. During the pandemic, we heard from a lot of you who said you applied for rent assistance with the state of Oregon and then got crickets for months. Well, now an audit shows there were indeed major problems inside the department in charge of hundreds of millions of dollars meant to help people stay in their homes. We're digging into the audit like no other news show in the market will. We'll have that when the story returns. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, when a lot of restrictions suddenly went into place and a lot of people lost their jobs because of it, a program was put into place to help them pay their rent. Now, almost 4 years later, a new audit from Oregon Secretary of State's office shows that the program here in Oregon had massive problems. The audit took a look at the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department. They were in charge of distributing $426 million in emergency rent relief money that came from the federal government. The program lasted from May of 2021 until June of 2023. Auditors found the agency cannot say for certain how much money even went to eligible applicants, or even how many applicants were paid, or how many households were helped. Yeah, it was that bad. Here's how it worked. If you lost your job because of the pandemic or had some kind of economic hardship, you'd apply online, tell them about your household and your income and where you live, and, well, then you waited. We talked to people who waited and waited and waited, some of them for months, waiting to find out if they were approved or not. If approved, money was sent to the applicant's landlord to pay for the rent. Over the years that the program was in place, the applications opened and closed depending on how much money was available, and we heard from a lot of people who worried about getting evicted. As the problems came to light, the Secretary of State's office ordered an audit in 2021 to find out what the heck is going on here. The auditors say Oregon Housing and Community Services had to scramble to put the emergency rent assistance program into place in a matter of months, and that they were simply not prepared at all. They say OHCS rushed to implement a software program that wasn't even finished yet in order to take the applications. They had poor customer service and communication challenges, and that they were understaffed with managers moving to different jobs and not enough full-time workers on the program. Not exactly a recipe for success. Simply put, the auditors wrote, OHCS was not prepared to respond to disaster housing emergencies despite its responsibility to do so under Oregon's emergency management framework. So take that in. The Oregon Housing and Community Services Department is our safety net to provide emergency housing during a huge natural disaster or crisis. And one thing the audit revealed, they were desperately unprepared to do that. One estimate shows about 176,000 households in Oregon were at risk of eviction in September of 2020. The audit shows that OHCS had a long backlog of applications and confirmed that some renters had to wait months to get the money that they needed. It also found that when that money did go out, the department did not always know if it was going to the right people. And they say they randomly tested 61 payments totaling more than $374,000. And guess what? They found out there were errors with 17 of those. So that's a 30% error rate. When they expand that and look at the entire program, the auditors estimate there could be as much as $11 million in payment errors. Some people getting too much, or the wrong person being paid, or some people who missed out on the money completely that they could have qualified for. The state auditor said the agency's numbers were so bad that they were issuing something called an adverse opinion for the first time in 25 years. That's audit speak to say the numbers are so fouled up, we just don't trust them. The auditor said that yes, 2020 was a difficult year for a lot of people with multiple emergencies happening all at once. But they said the department should have been better prepared, and that some of their problems uncovered by a different audit back in 2016 were still not addressed. The auditor said the office needs to get their you-know-what together because the pandemic will not be the last time we have to deal with housing emergencies. We could have wildfires, earthquakes, or other disasters at any time. OHCS responded saying, yeah, they're working on it. And they said OHCS remains focused on solutions to keep Oregonians stably housed before they experience homelessness and is committed to continual improvement. And they plan to implement some of the recommendations from the auditors. We certainly hope so. Coming up next on The Story, we'll take you back out to Morrow County, where much of my Tainted Waters series was focused on groundwater contamination there. You may remember that a clean water activist truck caught on fire just an hour after 3 state lawmakers visited to learn about the contamination. We have the results from the investigation into the cause of that fire when The Story returns. Let's check in now on something related to my Tainted Water series that we brought you in late last year. It's about a truck fire near the city of Boardman. The truck belonged to a clean water activist with the group Oregon Rural Action. Just an hour before the fire, 3 Oregon lawmakers had visited the home where the truck was parked as part of a tour to learn more about the contaminated water crisis there. We showed you how groundwater in Morrow and Umatilla counties is contaminated with nitrates because of farmers using too much fertilizer over decades and commercial food processors spraying their water over the fields as well. Shortly after the fire, there was an investigation into whether or not it was arson. But now we see it went nowhere. We're told that both an Oregon State detective and the state fire marshal's office were not able to determine the cause of the fire. They're listing it as undetermined, and the case is now closed. Oh, and one last thing. As part of our series, I asked for a sit-down interview with the leader of Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality. They're in charge of ensuring clean water for the state of Oregon. I asked for that interview about 7 weeks ago. I'm still waiting, but I'm not forgetting. Let's go, DEQ. In the meantime, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching, and remember the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff's coming up next. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.